Well, here we are in Hampton Court. And this has been just a wonderful place.
Philip was a kind and gentle person.
He was so well-mannered and polite and interacted in such a loving, caring way with everyone. He lit up the room with his smile.
If you look at these pictures, you can see what a free spirit Philip was, how effervescent and bubbly he was, how happy he was, and he had his whole life ahead of him. On June the 11th, Philip went out for his walk, and that was the last time I ever saw him.
We had a young gay man that was beat to death, left to die, and we didn't have a lot to go on.
It was starting to look a little difficult as far as us making an arrest. It was getting a little cold.
I kept hitting him, and this kid was screaming and screaming.
A crime of this level of brutality was a shock to me.
It made no sense to me at all why anyone would want to hurt Philip. There was no sense to it.
When all the information came out, I was shocked that it was done just because he was gay.
You would hear about hate crimes on the news, but it never happens to me. It never happens to my family. Well, it did. It happened to us. It happened to Philip.
Philip was born February 25th, 1978. He just seemed like a perfect size for me to hold. And I just remember treasuring those moments of cradling him and rocking him and watching him develop.
The first time I saw him, he just had this little scrunched up look on his face, like he wasn't sure being here was such a good idea after all, but he was so cute.
This was when Philip was a baby, and that is my dad holding him on the table at our house in Tucson.
He was raised in Tucson and lived on Apple Tree Lane.
This is Halloween, and we were going trick-or-treating, and I was in charge of holding Philip. He was dressed up. I can't tell what he was, but he's holding his pumpkin, and just fun days in Tucson. We just had an unspoken love for each other that just came naturally, and we enjoyed our time together. Our young lives were spent with very happy memories.
Philip wasn't a typical boy. He wasn't very rambunctious. He didn't want to play sports. He was more interested in listening to music. He didn't raise a lot of fuss. He didn't get in fights at school. He was just a calm, quiet kid.
When we were growing up, being gay wasn't talked about. I don't even know if I really knew what gay was. It wasn't a common topic.
Growing up in the 80s in Tucson, it was a very conservative kind of town. If someone was gay, they would have a hard time. It was not acceptable to my parents. It wasn't acceptable to Philip's parents. It was just not spoken of because it wasn't allowed.
I'm sure it was very difficult for Philip to come out in 1993. I don't remember necessarily being shocked or surprised. I still loved him, and it didn't change a thing about the way I felt about him.
When he did come out, he did not get much acceptance from his parents, and he left home as a teenager because of that.
Back in the 1990s, it was still stigmatized, it was still considered unusual. Some people were very accepting, others were very not. There was still a lack of understanding, a lack of willingness to accept.
Shortly after he came out and had left home, my mom was there to make sure that he was okay, that he'd found a place to live, that he was with good people.
I met Philip outside the IBT bar in 1999. I found Philip to be very confident. I thought, he's very sophisticated and very directed, knew what he wanted, knew what he was looking for. And I was very impressed with that. After we met that night, we were constantly together. He had his own apartment. He had a job. We spent essentially all of our free time together. When Philip moved in with me, then I knew this is the real thing. We would rent movies and watch them at home, and just most of the time, just being together, whatever we were doing, going food shopping or running errands, going to the bank, those chores which were such drudgery became something I was anxious to do because I could do it with him. I was smitten. I was hook, line, and sinker.
I remember Philip was living with his partner, Jonathan, in Tucson, and that they were happy.
I think Jonathan was a good place for Philip to be. It was a safe home. It was someone who loved him for who he was and wanted to be with him.
I realized that he was estranged from his family. I think his mother wanted to have a relationship with him. I think she was sad that they didn't have a strong bond. So when I encouraged him to reach out to them, they responded and, in fact, would even invite me along with him to things like a Christmas party or events like that. So it made a tremendous difference in his life when he kind of got his family back.
Philip did a lot to show his love towards his dad. Took him to lunch and spent special time with him, which of course meant a lot to my uncle, and it meant a lot to me that Philip had that kind of a heart.
They saw that with Jonathan that he had someone who loved him and someone that he could spend his life with. And that, I think, enabled them to see that being gay isn't the end of the world, it's just the beginning.
He went to work for American Airlines, and I was so proud of him. He was traveling and enjoying life, and I was happy for him.
After Philip got his job at American, we were starting to take plane trips. And it changed his whole attitude from living in a small town his whole life to seeing the world. The first major trip we made was to Bermuda. We had a wonderful time. And Philip was in heaven. I think it was the happiest week of his life.
We would email now and again. He would tell me a little about his job and that he was getting to do some traveling.
Here we are in the Admirals Club in Chicago on our way to England. This was the highlight of my life, this trip. Philip was in heaven, sitting in those first-class seats. I'd never seen anything like that. There's Philip, sitting in his seat. He's playing with his TV, trying to get it to work. I never flew first class before I met Philip. That was a new experience for me. That's something I couldn't have done on my own. We're driving along the sea route. Philip is doing his best to drive in this crazy place. And he was immensely proud of that. Here comes Philip. This little walk in the forest is just delightful. When we got back from our trip, our relationship was on a whole different level. And I knew at that point that this was it for me. This was my life. And I believe he felt the same way. We were so happy, and we went about our normal lives. Are you done with that thing? Three weeks later, Philip returned from work probably around midnight. Philip's job at American Airlines was a reservationist, and I know that can be very, very hard because people are upset, they're not getting their flights, their flight was delayed, there's a problem. He would be quite keyed up when he would get home. What he would usually do in that case is take a walk around the neighborhood. He loved the quiet of the night. So Philip said goodnight to me and went out for his walk. And that was the last time I ever saw him.
When I first received the call about this case, I was at home. It was early in the morning. The information I got over the telephone was that a passerby had walked by and seen an unidentified male laying in the street. And they thought he had been hit by a car. So they called 911. The scene was in the middle of the road on 5th Street between Hoff Avenue and 3rd Avenue.
There was so much blood that they could not determine what the injuries were.
When the paramedics got there, they saw the seriousness of the injuries to his head and determined this was not a car crash. It was not consistent with being hit by a car. It was in fact an assault. So they grabbed him and ran to the hospital with him.
When I arrived at the scene, I saw the police officers, I saw everything was blocked off, I saw the tape.
When we came down here to see the scene, he had already been transported to the hospital. What was left was a large pool of blood with clothing that had been cut off the victim and some bandaging from the medics that arrived to treat him.
They were taking photographs of the scene, they were looking for evidence, they were checking for surveillance, they were looking for witnesses that may have been in their homes, heard something, saw something. And this was early hours in the morning, so a lot of people are asleep.
All the evidence that we found belonged to the victim. His blood, his clothing. There was no other evidence found that would point to anybody else that was responsible for this. While we were at the scene looking it over, we were told that the victim had in fact died of his injuries. I went to the hospital to actually get a look at our victim. He suffered serious injuries to his head, to his skull, at least 2 of which penetrated the skull and into his brain. His head was heavily bandaged. His eyes were swollen shut. They were black and blue from all the blood draining down into his face. Because of that, homicide detectives are now involved to determine how he got injured like that.
The Tucson Police Department has to find out who he is. That was the next important thing.
I woke up and Philip was not home. His car was parked in its spot, and I thought, this is odd, he's not here. And I was starting to get concerned.
I arranged to have fingerprints taken from him since we didn't know who he was, and also arranged to have a photograph taken of his face in case we could get him identified just by showing the photograph around. But he didn't look anything like he did in real life.
He was hit in the head with a baseball bat almost 20 times. His injuries to his face in particular were so horrifically terrible. He was unrecognizable.
After his fingerprints were taken at the hospital, he was eventually identified by fingerprint comparison. Apparently, he had been in the system from some other prior contact with the police.
He had very minor infractions for traffic-related offenses. Luckily, his fingerprints were in their system, otherwise he may have gone a long time without being identified.
Once Mr. Walsted was identified, we were able to track down his next of kin, which was his mother. The police department were able to make contact with her and explain to her what happened and notified her of his death. Notifying people of a death of one of their relatives is never an easy one.
I got a telephone call from my cousin saying, we heard something on the radio and we were just wondering if Philip is all right. And I said, well, no, he's not. He did not come home last night. They said, well, there's been a report of a murder.
I remember Philip's mother told police that he was gay and he was living with his partner in downtown Tucson, which was blocks from the location where he was found.
I immediately went down to the police station, and that's when I found out that it was in fact Philip who had been murdered.
The email came in, and I saw it was from my sister. I'll never forget what it said. She said, I don't know how to tell you this, but Philip is dead. He was robbed and beaten, and he died.
Learning that Philip had died, I'll never forget it. It's basically like you're melting into the earth and the world is spinning around you. It's so tragic. It was such a horrible piece of news.
It was like being run over by a truck. It was a huge emotional blow. I just remember I cried and cried for probably an hour.
The feeling was indescribable. It was like my life is over too. I'm finished. Why even carry on? I'd found this wonderful man who I was planning to spend my life with. All my plans, all my dreams, all my aspirations revolved around him. And that was gone. I was a mess. I was a wreck.
When we determined Mr. Walsted was living with somebody, that person became a person of interest.
Initially, he is a suspect because that's the first thing they're going to do. They're going to turn their eyes on the partner.
I went to the police station and talked to the detectives. They told me that he was probably beaten with a 2x4. They clearly did not want to say a bat. I guess they did that to see my reaction.
When Jonathan came to the station, he was very professional. He knew why I wanted to talk to him. Yes, he was nervous, but he was very forthright, telling me everything I wanted, answered questions that I hadn't had the answers to.
We talked for, I'd say, maybe an hour. And I think during that period, the cops realized it couldn't possibly have been me.
What he did was tighten up a timeline. He had indicated that Philip had worked to a certain time, got home late, had a beer, said he was going to go out. I think from the beginning, they were starting to minimize anything he had to do with this crime. Nothing of importance was found by the police at Jonathan and Philip's home. The information we had, they were living a normal, happy, fun life together.
I had gotten information that he liked to frequent a bar on 4th Avenue. It's called IBT's.
IBT's is primarily a gay bar, but it's also a dance club. All kinds of people go in there to have fun, drink, and dance.
We talked to people in IBT's, the customers and the security people that were there. They didn't have a lot of background for me other than they'd seen him in there a lot, they talked, but it was very minimal according to the people that we spoke to. The security people knew him just as a frequent visitor to the bar, but they didn't socialize with him. You could probably consider it was getting close to a dead end. Nobody could give us any information about his activity that night. In our attempt to find some more leads and talk to people who knew Philip, we went to his place of business and talked to several of his co-workers. None of them could give us anything but a little background information about their time socializing with him within the work environment.
There was no surveillance, no eyewitnesses that were known to the police, no cameras, no ring cameras, no porch cameras, none of that stuff. No witnesses that came forward, just one 911 caller saying that he had found a man bloodied in the middle of the road. You don't have anything to go on, and your sole witness is the partner who was asleep at the time, and everything that he told them appeared to be correct and true.
It was very difficult not knowing if the person that had done it would ever be caught. Somebody needed to be held accountable for what they had done, and we didn't know who.
I remember just being so sad for my aunt. It was extremely devastating to watch her try to deal with the pain.
The local weekly paper picked up the story, and flyers were put out asking the public for its help in solving this crime. The mother of an eyewitness came forward saying that her daughter had information, eyewitness information, on the homicide involving Philip. That was a huge, huge break in the case. It was so big that the detectives all immediately rallied to find out what this woman knew about the homicide.
We needed to talk to this girl. We needed to find her. I asked officers in that area if they could locate her, and they brought her to me at the station where I interviewed her.
The young woman did tell the police that she saw a picture of Philip in the newspaper, and that she also recognized the photograph from a driver's license.
She told me that on the morning of June 12th, she was with a person she identified as David Hagan, and they were just driving around in his truck.
David Higdon was a 20-year-old who lived in Tucson who had just recently been released from prison for burglary, drug charges, and aggravated assault. He was known to have a very bad temper, he was very angry, and it was predictable that another offense was bound to happen.
They ended up parking the pickup truck, sitting on the tailgate of the pickup truck. When the victim came walking by, they engaged in some conversation. Philip stayed at the tailgate of the pickup truck. She ended up getting into the cab, and that's when, a short period of time later, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw Higdon beating him with a baseball bat.
I looked in the rearview mirror and I looked over my shoulder and I saw David hit him with the baseball bat. And he kept hitting him, and this kid was screaming and screaming.
She heard David yelling at Philip, and at that point, Philip took off running with David in pursuit. They went around the corner out of this girl's sight, but she could still hear what was going on.
David kept yelling at him to just go to sleep. The kid wouldn't pass out, he wouldn't go unconscious, and David just kept yelling at him, go to sleep.
She told the police that she could hear the sound of the baseball bat striking the victim. Higdon came back a short time later carrying items from the victim, and she identified at some point as being his watch, his shoes, keys, and driver's license.
What did you do with this stuff?
It's at his house as far as I know. They were gonna get rid of it, including the shoes David was wearing, because David had told me he kicked this guy over and over and over in the head, and his shoe was so bloody.
She was very emotional, she was crying, she was distraught, and she said she believed that Higdon had done this to Philip because he was gay.
I think it was because this guy was gay.
That was the only reason?
I think so.
I asked her what had happened after David got back to the truck. She said that they eventually went back to David's house. David took all the items that he had taken from Philip into the house, and he had a discussion with his brother. Then tells him how to get rid of DNA evidence and that he shouldn't even have brought that stuff back to the house. She said he also used the victim's driver's license to cut lines of cocaine, and that he keeps his driver's license in a top drawer of a toolbox. When I asked her why she didn't come tell me about this information, she said she was afraid of David.
Has he threatened you?
He threatened me to my kid.
What did he threaten you with?
He told me that if I told anyone, I'd be next.
Okay. And you're assuming being next meant he would kill you and your kids, is that correct? Okay.
The police, with this information they had, identified who Higdon was and where he was living, got a search warrant for his house.
We'd set up on surveillance at David's residence. At approximately 1 a.m., David drove back up in that white pickup truck that matched the description that the young lady had told me about. And that's when we made a plan to make an entry into the house. We had to force the door open. We made an entry inside where we found David, his brother, and his father.
Once the search warrant is served, everyone is removed to the house, taken to the station to do follow-up interviews. Detectives remain on scene, searching for items, identifying items, photographs are taken, and the items that are important or of evidentiary value are collected. They are taken to the evidence and properties section of the Tucson Police Department. At the same time, other detectives are attempting to interview his brother, David Higdon, who is the suspect in the case.
Officers recovered Philip's driver's license. We found an aluminum bat with blood on it. We found some shoes that had blood speckles on it. Jeans also with some blood spatter, as well as Philip's glasses.
The brother of David Higdon was interviewed first. Initially, he denied knowing anything, but eventually told the police that his brother did come home and admitted to him that he'd hurt somebody.
We went to interview David. I advised him of his rights, and he said he wanted an attorney. So once that happens, we stop asking questions.
David Higdon was arrested on first-degree murder charges, and he was transported, booked into the local jail, and held on a $1 million bond. I think there was a huge relief in the community that someone was arrested and in custody for the brutal slaying of Philip.
We still didn't have a whole lot of information about Higdon other than what the police had been able to tell us, that he wasn't accepting of gays, he wasn't accepting of people of color.
When I found out that it was just a random stranger that decided to kill Philip because he was gay, I didn't understand that. It is hard to fathom that there's that much evil in somebody's mind.
I knew that there had been a lot of crimes against gay people, so it was a shock that it was my partner, but it was not a surprise.
People did want this to be classed as a hate crime. As time went on, we got more and more bits of information that supported it as a hate crime.
I had gotten information about David's affiliation with the white supremacist groups within the prison system. Letters had been intercepted that he wrote, which alluded to being part of the white supremacist groups, the Aryan Brotherhood. Those letters were shipped to the county attorney's office.
Once we had all the information necessary, including from the young lady, confirmation that Philip was actually gay, and the compilation of all the information together, it was classified as a hate crime. So while incarcerated, he did get a tattoo with lightning bolts, and they were colored in. The important part about that is when anyone who's associated with this gang darkens in their bolts, it's because they have committed a homicide of one of the classes of people that the gang is against. We use that information later on to show that that's another reason he was guilty of the homicide, because he followed the protocol to let the world know, I'm a killer for the cause. David Higdon's trial for murder started on January 13th, 2005. The trial lasted 11 days.
David Higdon saw me sit down in the witness chair. I looked at Higdon. You could see what kind of person he was.
Being in the courtroom and hearing the details of Philip's murder was devastating. It was extremely painful. I remember just being so angry at the guy that we were all having to go through that, and that he was being defended, and that he actually thought he had a defense against killing Philip.
The defense for Mr. Higdon argued that he didn't do the killing, that the state's evidence was weak, that the state's evidence was not enough to support a conviction for first-degree murder. We had witness interviews. All the items have collected from Higdon's house, including a bloody bat, bloody shoes, bloody watch, driver's license of the victim. Statements from the brother saying that he had used the bat, he had beat somebody, and he was covered in blood. We identified Higdon as a white supremacist who hated certain people, Jewish people, people of color, homosexual people, and only wanted one breed of people to continue, and that was the white breed.
It was very difficult for me to look at him. I thought it was just an evil presence.
I found an expert in the world of skinhead, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, Aryan Brotherhood. A person who had actually been in that lifestyle for 12 years and had walked away from it. I asked if he could testify as an expert, and he agreed to do so. The fact that we had an expert to talk about white supremacy and why they don't like certain classifications of people, gay people being one of the classes, what it means to have tattoos on a body from the white supremacist organizations. All that information is evidence. We put it all together, we segment it, and we put it on piece by piece by piece by piece. And at the conclusion, we got a verdict.
On January 27, 2005, David Hagman was convicted of first-degree murder.
I did not see any remorse in this man's eyes or demeanor. I don't believe that he was remorseful at all.
In March of 2005, the day of the sentencing, Higdon arrived in court, and he shows up with a skinhead. I thought, this guy will never quit. He hasn't gotten it. He's never shown remorse. He doesn't care. This is the life he chose. This is the life he wants. Nothing else matters except himself.
We had all written impact statements of what Philip's loss had meant to us, and the prosecutor used much of that. His mother spoke at the sentencing, and she did a beautiful job.
He was sentenced by the judge to natural life in prison.
When we heard the sentence, it was a great relief. Philip's mother was in the courtroom, and when the judge said life without parole, she just let out a yes! And that's how I felt.
I met some of the gay community when I went to the sentencing hearing. They were there because they were family too. And they lost a brother and a friend.
Since Philip Walsted was murdered, the Tucson Police Department has actually taken several steps to try to eradicate hate crimes in their community. One was that they had the safe places policy where people that are different sexual orientations and are feeling threatened know there are certain businesses and places they can go to seek refuge, to be safe. They now have liaisons that are specifically trained on how to communicate most effectively and take these reports and to be the most understanding and compassionate with people that already feel so vulnerable.
I find it heartbreaking, that somebody that young had so much more life to live, and it was taken away from them. It's not right. It should never be right. They didn't deserve it. People are people with different choices and different thoughts, and they shouldn't be killed for those.
Well, we're on our last hour now, so I'm gonna get a sunny view from our balcony.
There's a memorial for Philip in Tucson. There's a big tree there and a park bench, and family members and loved ones have visited it over the years.
It had a profound effect on me. I do think about the case. I drive by this memorial and I glance over that and think about it.
I left Tucson a few days after the trial, and this is the first time I've been back. I haven't even seen the memorial.
It's a place I can go and I can remember spending time with him, and it's a place for good memories.
We've lost somebody that will never know what their future was. We never know what their potential was. We'll never know what value they could have provided to the community. It's important for Tucson to remember.
Coming back here has been very hard for me. Seeing our old house where we lived together for 3 years. Seeing the memorial. It's been very, very hard for me, but I'm glad that I did it.
I know that losing Philip has been a devastating event in his mom's life. I know that she is, to this day, devastated. Philip was just a sweet soul.
What I miss about Philip was the simple things we used to do together. We just enjoyed each other's company. And I knew that it would never happen for me again. I never even tried to meet anybody again. I knew that part of my life was over.
I would have loved for him and Jonathan to have built their life together and to have perhaps gone on to, have children. It would have been so wonderful.
I miss his quiet spirit, his funny little side jokes, and just the sweetness of who he was. I miss that we didn't have more time together.
When I met my wife, it was the first same-sex relationship either one of us had been in, and it surprised the heck out of us both, I think. But I do wish Philip had lived long enough to see me find happiness with my wife. Whether it was him poking fun at me and saying, I knew it. And I can see him do that. That'd be great.
I asked Philip if he wanted to get married. He thought that was silly in those days, but it was not the thing that it is today. I would have been happy to.
I want Philip to be remembered for being kind and joyful, for the love he had for Jonathan, for the love he had for his family, because he was taken from us, and I don't want anybody to forget him.
We're about to get on the road. Be seeing you.